It's an issue that has divided not only Ugandan society, but even the ruling party of President Yoweri Museveni.
Against was 62, in favor 315.
The man who stood to benefit wasn't there to celebrate his victory, but his supporters were. A scene of relative calm compared with the months leading up to the vote, in which MPs brawled within the halls of Parliament.
I'm disappointed that our own constitution, which is supposed to be durable, as it is stated in the preamble, has been amended just like that.
This is the second major change to Uganda's constitution, and marks the second time Museveni will be able to stay in power as a result. He's ruled since 1986. He's now 73 years old. Ugandan law stated that a president must be between the ages of 35 and 75 to be fit for office. So when the next presidential election comes along in 2021, Museveni would have been ineligible to run. Now he can. Ugandans themselves have mixed opinions on whether he should be allowed to run for a sixth term as president.
So I don't see any danger in age limit, except one works hard to become a president of Uganda so that he can take more years.
We don't have political future in this country from up to date, because first of all, Museveni is a military dictator. He's the one who's tampering the constitution. Everything's under him. When you look at security, when you look at all the institutions, even the judiciary, even the electoral committee, everywhere, he's under him.
Where are you taking me? Where are you taking me?
But the issue has invariably opened the eyes of many Ugandans. During the course of the No campaign, protesters, including opposition leaders, were arrested. 2 were even targeted in a grenade attack. The argument for staying the course has faltered in other African countries, like Zimbabwe, where longtime President Robert Mugabe was recently deposed. And South Africa's Jacob Zuma could also soon be on his way out. Yoweri Museveni, Africa's third longest serving president, may be in a position to continue his reign. But it appears growing opposition could encumber his hold on power and tarnish his legacy. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Kampala is Dickens Okello Honeystraw. He's the Ugandan Parliament correspondent for news website Chimp Reports. Also in Kampala, we have Joshua Poro. He's a political analyst and journalist. And from London, we have Charlotte King. She's an Africa analyst at the Economist Intelligence Unit. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Dickens, let me begin with you. So we have President Museveni. He's 73 years old. He's had 31 years in power. Why does he need more time?
Well, it's not about him, but also the party and the whole country. Indeed, you have said it, he has been in power for the last 31 years. His party, the ruling party, the National Resistance Movement, still want him around, and there was room for that amendment. He himself, he feels there's still a lot he can offer for the country, and he's not forcing himself, he's doing it through the Constitution.
He's not forcing himself, Joshua. He's doing it through the Constitution. And if we actually look at Parliament, we see that the bill, when it was a bill before it became law, was passed 315 to 62. It's democracy. That's what the lawmakers want. Joshua?
I think it will be a mistake for anybody to imagine that this is democracy. Let me pose a question. Could you imagine that democracy is changing the Constitution for the benefit of one man who has been in power for over 30 years? Several years ago, we changed the Constitution. We removed the presidential term limit because of the benefit of one man. And now we have changed the Constitution, removing the term limits that we earlier removed, reinstating the term limits that we earlier removed, and now removing the age limit, still for the benefit of the same man. I don't think I would want to call this this democracy. The Constitution anywhere in the world can be changed at any point. But leaders who are responsible and legitimate choose to respect the Constitution. Why can't ours respect the same Constitution, respect the term limits that were there, respect the age limit that was there at the time? I don't think this is democracy. I think our democracy is being stifled for the selfish interests of one man.
Charlotte, this one man in the past said he despised African leaders who want to overstay their welcome in power, but he wants to stick around. Now, what can we make of that?
there's strength in both of the arguments that we've heard here. Yes, on the one hand, he does still carry a degree of personal popularity, both within Parliament, within the party, but also within rural areas as well among Ugandans. But for international businesses and for us looking at it from a political risk perspective, there's a huge amount of risk surrounding this idea of very personalised rule. Because frankly, he, A, can't live forever. So at some stage, there is going to have to be a succession process in Uganda. And to an extent, the longer that's put off, the riskier it becomes and the more difficult it becomes. And there's also increasingly a huge degree of risk surrounding the patronage politics that underpins Museveni's rule. Yes, he does carry a degree of popularity, but he also shores up his support by leaning very heavily on the police and the security services, and also by leaning on handouts, and he buys a lot of this support that we see. So, as I say, I think there's strength in both arguments, but ultimately it's a risky way to go about ensuring political stability.
So, Dickens, your country has one of the youngest populations in the world. You yourself, you are a young man, from what I can see. You support the president and you support removing the age limit. A lot of other young people do not. They protested in September. A lot of them were beaten up. They faced tear gas. A lot of them were arrested. Do you accept that a lot of other young Ugandans don't want this because they want somebody who represents them more, who represents the vibrant youth more?
Well, clearly, as you have stated it, indeed, I'm a young man. I'm 28 now. There's one thing we are forgetting. This law is not all about one man, as you guys have started it, that it's from 70. Anybody else who is above 75 come at the year of election in 2023 he or she can easily stand. It is not that. There's no connotation that it's only there for President Museveni.
So are you excited about
young people?
Are you excited about the fact?
To get to leadership.
Certainly.
Yeah, that's very true.
Okay, so besides him, so that will be 2021, where he would be running for a 6th term into his late 70s. So besides him, you're telling me honestly, you're excited about the fact that there might be other candidates who are 75, 76, 77, 78 years old. That's what you want for your democracy.
Well, in the United States, Donald Trump is above 70. Is above 70. In Zimbabwe, the world has just celebrated a man of 75 taking over from Zimbabwe. Uganda is not an island. Uganda is also is a country among those in the world. And anybody from 35 is free to stand against President Museveni. It's not that it's going to be there automatic.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you say Zimbabwe.
There's going to be elections.
Certainly, it's interesting you say Zimbabwe because
whoever is willing.
Okay, fair enough. But some people make the comparison not with Mnangagwa, the man you're talking about, but they make the comparison with Mugabe. They're saying Museveni is becoming Mugabe. They're not celebrating the fact that Museveni is being like Mnangagwa, right? What do you make of the argument that Yoweri Museveni is becoming more and more like Robert Mugabe?
Well, at the situation of Zimbabwe, you can't compare with Uganda. First of all, the economic policies that were put in by Mugabe is quite different from here. Charles just stated that in the international perspective, looking at it economic-wise, there is a risk. And I even don't see it. For the last 31 years that Museveni has been in power, economy has been growing at an average 6.3%. Charlotte knows that very well. And I'm not seeing any risk of our economy collapsing tomorrow because Museveni is still there remaining in power, or there's someone else who is like 90 years who is coming to rule Uganda. Okay. Economy is still perfect. Okay. They mentioned about the police. They mentioned about the court being used. Security was only used when rioters went to the streets. There were others wanted to ban. So the responsibility of the security is to detect and avert crime. Security did its work. There was boxing in parliament. We all know that. And cases went to court. Nobody was shot or killed extrajudicially.
Okay.
They followed the law.
Okay, so let me take your economic point and pose it to Joshua. Joshua, you might not like the fact that President Museveni is going to stick around for a longer time to come, but as Dickens said, he's grown the economy and he's been the stability candidate for more than 3 decades. Isn't that a fair argument?
In 1986, when President Museveni took over power, our currency was stronger than it is now. During the Obote regime, $1 US was equivalent to 3 Ugandan shillings. but now $1 is equivalent to 3,600 Ugandan shillings. Dickens alleges that but notes that our economy is growing at a rate of 6.3%. In 2011, President Museveni did promise that by the end of 2017, Uganda is going to be in the middle-income economy. We are not even anywhere close to that. All we have is a lot of money being put into circulation, increasing the levels of inflation. World fuel prices are going low. Uganda fuel prices can only go high. Prices of commodities can only go high. Inflation might have been controlled just a little bit, but that does not mean that the standard of living of the ordinary Ugandan has been increased. Money for consultation on this very issue was given to members of parliament, 25 million shillings for each member of parliament. Some of them returned and some detained, but I can say more than 350 did remain with 25 million. Now just imagine all this money going into circulation. There's going to be a by-election. There's going to be a ruling member of parliament going in for this by-election. Lots of money is going to be thrown into the economy. Eventually, we cannot grow. Our money value cannot grow. We can only continue to lose value. So I don't think that our economy growing at a rate of 6.3% is at any point going to help to make the Ugandan economy stable. But also it's very, very important to note that it is not because this man is 73 years. It's because this man has started to believe that he is the only one with the most brilliant ideas to take Uganda forward. It's been 31 years. I myself have interviewed him before, and I asked him the question, you have been in power for 31 years. Now, what new thing are you going to bring for Uganda in the next 5 years? That was during his last campaign. And then he moves forward to not. And as usual, him and his aging cabinet and aging presidential advisors whom I see have completely no role in our economy start to tell stories of how they fought in the Bush War. If you compare the Bush War between then and now, do you see a big difference? My question, have you seen Rwanda? Rwanda just started yesterday, and they're way past Uganda. They're going at 180 miles per hour. Okay. We are doing 20 miles an hour.
Okay, so you're not happy when you compare it to a country like Rwanda, which has its own criticisms with regards Paul Kagame and his leadership and him wanting to stay on forever and ever, it seems, but maybe they're doing better economically. Let me ask you, Dickens, about the Catholic Church, because there was a New Year's message from the Archbishop of Kampala, Cyprian Kizito Luwanga. He rallied some citizens to resist the, quote, bad politics under Yoweri Museveni's rule. He also claimed the president was dishonest. When you have the church wading in and saying these sorts of things, doesn't it tell you that something's bubbling under the surface and that there might be some issues here with the fact that the president wants to stick around for a long, long time and that the age limit is gone?
Well, the church has a very big following, and a bishop coming out to say that indeed can send a strong message. But also, according to the Ugandan constitution, church leaders, just like traditional leaders, they're supposed to be non-partisan. But of course, in case of anything, they can come out. Nobody is saying they shouldn't come out. To me, the Archbishop had the right opportunity to air. He had the right way to air out what he wanted, but telling his members, telling the church members that the changing of the constitution is illegal is something that I didn't expect. Even the Catholic Church itself, since the 17th century, there have been a lot of changes. They have made amendments. What they are saying is the moral question, not the legal part of it. Legally, there was nothing wrong. Now, who has the moral yardstick? How about the changes in the changes in the Catholic Church? What has he ever said about it? There was nothing wrong with this changing of the constitution. Him coming out to say that, to me, he's taking a partisan side, which he's not supposed to do. Right. In the actual sense, he's not supposed to take a side. Okay. He's only supposed to state the merits and the demerits without condemning. In this case, he condemned the state.
And let me build on that and go to Charlotte. So when you start to see these fractures, we've seen it elsewhere on the continent. We saw it in a place like Burundi, when Pierre Nkurunziza decided to stay on. When you talk about risk, is this what you're talking about? The fact that one man wants to stay on, his supporters want to keep his power entrenched, and the country is restive as a result of it. Is that the risk you're talking about?
Absolutely, and I think the comments by the Catholic Church were actually fairly significant, because what they do is demonstrate and prove that the pressure on Museveni isn't just coming from the disenfranchised youths that might take to the streets. because ultimately those are fairly easy to repress if you've got a strong enough security services. But the comments by the Catholic Church show that there's also pressure among the elite as well, among the elder generation, but among the more senior figures in civil society, in religious organisations, in the political elite, in universities. The pressure on Museveni from this cohort of people could perhaps be much harder to defend against. So when we monitor the risk, we of course look across the continent. So yes, we might draw similarities on some instances with somewhere like Zimbabwe, where that revolt came largely from within the elite. Yes, there was political pressure from the bottom, and yes, there were protests. But ultimately, the change of regime there was fueled by internal dynamics within the regime. And I think something that we'll be looking very closely at over the next few years, and certainly in the run-up to 2021, is how the other senior cadres within the NRM respond to this very evident policy now that Museveni plans on staying around for a very long time.
And Joshua, when people tell you, whatever you might think of the man or the ruling party, the president was democratically elected 5 times. So suck it up.
I think that at this point, our definition of democracy is most likely to change. During the last election, the results that were declared were actually for just 30% of the country. The rest of the 70%, the results had not yet arrived at the tallying center before the results were declared. So why would one love to imagine that 30% of the votes would account for the 70%? At least I would support a 70% accounting for 30%. In addition to that, members of the opposition and independent candidates who were at the National Tallying Center, who were validating the votes, making sure that the right numbers have come, were not allowed to have phones. All they had was a computer monitor in front of them to see how many votes were counted in which constituency or in which district or from which polling station. But they were not even allowed to have communicating devices to communicate to their counterparts back down in the field so that they can have the correct figures of how many were counted down and how many have arrived here. So I don't think that is a democratic process. Besides that, I want to just touch a little bit on the issue of the church. The church has a responsibility to its flock. You see, you cannot expect an archbishop, a pastor, or a reverend to ignore the fact that there is a problem with our society and not use a platform like the pulpit to talk to members of society who come to that church. Much as they simply play a ceremonial role and not an active or partisan role, I think they have a primary responsibility in advising and guiding members of the flock and members of the community spiritually, because these are the voters, these are the electorate, these are the people who make the choices, and these are the ordinary Ugandans who need to hear the truth about what is going on.
Dickens Okello Hanistro, I'm going to give you the final word here. We've seen a few questions being hung on the notion of democracy in your country. Especially Joshua, he questions whether Museveni was actually properly, really democratically elected, especially in the last election. Tell me what you have to say to that.
Well, in the last election, the turnout was 57%. There's no any other country in the world where the turnout has ever been 100%. It has never happened. Even if in Korea they are to vote tomorrow, you'll never get that 100%. Now, in this 57%, Museveni indeed got above 50% plus 1 vote. And those who disagreed with him, they went to court, and the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, decided that his win was legitimate. There was nothing illegitimate with his win. Well, he has been there. He has been elected 5 times, and all these 5 times, all the political parties participate in the election. There's no any candidate who has ever been locked up. Like he has just mentioned a neighboring country where a candidate, a lady, she wasn't put even in the ballot, and she was locked, and she's still in prison right now. You can't compare that to Uganda, really. In Uganda, nobody has ever been incarcerated because he or she has shown interest to stand against Museveni. And nobody has ever been stopped by Electoral Commission to be nominated to stand for election against Museveni. It has never happened, and I don't see it happening. In Uganda, we have the breed of democracy we have is a matured one. Nobody can come and stop anyone from talking whatever he or she wants. You can express yourself freely and at any time, and nobody's going to arrest you. There is court. In case of anything, there's not going to be firing squad. they take you to court and they follow all the judicial procedure.
Okay. There's
Our
no firing
democracy
squad.
is real.
I mean, that is
You
encouraging.
just mentioned what happened at, what
some would say
happened in
some would say that's a low bar, but unfortunately, I've got a wrap now. The man is 73 years old. He's been in power for more than 3 decades. He's still healthy. Is this healthy for democracy, removing the age limit? We'll be watching Uganda closely to find out. But for the moment, I've got to thank you all, Dickens Okello, Honeystraw, Joshua Porro, and Charlotte King. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.